Brad sent me a photo of the award earlier on today, and I forwarded it to my youngest son, who, commenting on the baldness of Lewis, said, "Is it a you or a Lewis?" No, it's a deep honour to be the first recipient of this award. I was asked by the Collegian, the newspaper at Grove City College, what it was like to be the recipient of the C.S. Lewis Award, and my comment was, I don't think I've won anything since the Grammar School Latin Prize in 1983. So after 40 years, it's a new experience for me. And I'd like to give thanks specifically to Brad and to the Davenant Institute, the Davenant Trust, and also to others who've helped me in my work. Perhaps most notably First Things, Grove City College, the Ethics and Public Policy Centre, and the Madison program at Princeton University, that all gave me, I think, lucky breaks. Thinking of the book of Ecclesiastes, time and chance plays a huge role in the lives of us all, and I've been very blessed that the times have generated many blessed and good chances for me over the years. And of course, thank my wife, Katrina, who allowed me to be unemployed for a bit longer than probably I should have been many years ago when I was looking for my first academic job. So I owe a huge amount to her, and also to my children, John and Peter, to my daughter-in-law, Lauren, and to my granddaughter, Emily. And Emily, in some ways, inflects some of what I'm going to speak tonight, because I remember the moment that I was told that I became a grandfather, and my mind went to Psalm 128, verse 6, where, of course, the psalmist calls upon the person he's addressing. He said, "May you be blessed to live to see your children's children." And I'd always assumed that was merely the blessing of longevity, that may you be blessed to live a long time. But there is time and there is time. There are certain moments in time that bring a certain quality with them. And when one knows that one's become a grandparent, when one holds one's grandchild in one's hands, in one's arms for the first time, you realise that living to see your children's children is not just about living a long time. It's a peculiar blessing. A peculiar blessing that I've been very privileged to experience. And of course, the other thing, I'm an Englishman, therefore I'm generally pessimistic. I hold my granddaughter in my arms, I rejoice at the birth of my granddaughter, and I immediately think, wow, I thought I'd only got to worry about the next 20 or 30 years. Now I have to worry about the next 70 years. So it focuses one's mind also on the long game. Anyway, reflecting upon C.S. Lewis, first of all, before I move to the Abolition of Man, just to offer a personal anecdote. I did not grow up in a Christian home. I did grow up in a very loving home. Mum and Dad loved me and cared for me, and I could not have asked, in some ways, for a more idyllic childhood than growing up in the West Country of England. I do remember, however, when I was 8 or 9, a family friend gave me a copy of Prince Caspian as a Christmas present. And when I opened it, my mum took one look at it and said, "Oh, you don't want to read that. It's religious propaganda." When your mum says something to you when you're 8 or 9, fixes it in your mind long term. And I didn't read Lewis, actually, for many years after that. I came to read Lewis around about 2012, 2013, when I'd been called. I was teaching at a seminary at the time, but I was called to be pastor of a local Presbyterian church, and we were wrestling with how do we reach the local community with the gospel. And I did what Presbyterians do. I set up a committee to look into it. I'm very good, as an administrator, I proved very adept at setting up committees that I was not actually involved in. It's a great way of delegating power and authority. And the committee came back and said, "We've got a crazy idea. You have the accents." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And they said, we we think a great outreach would be for you to sit in a rocking chair in a local park and read the Narnia books night after night to local kids. And I remember thinking, that sounds like an insane idea. I did set up the committee, and as an oldest child, I'm a bit of a rule follower. So we did it. And for the years that I think of 5 of the 6 years I was pastor, we did what we called Narnia in the Park, where I would literally sit in a rocking chair and read a Narnia book to any of the local kids from the neighbourhood who would turn up and sit on the grass and listen. And my wife did artwork for a little tract that we produced, and my church secretary, the wife of one of my closest friends, did a little gospel tract based on a particular C.S. Lewis book. And I confess that many, many years on from my mum warning me of C.S. Lewis, I actually fell in love with the Narnia books. Not so much for the sophistication of the stories. I think the stories are actually wonderfully simple in many ways. But when you read somebody out loud, you can tell whether they can write English or not. You can tell whether their English, the aesthetics of their linguistic abilities, captures the imagination. It became very clear to me that C.S. Lewis was a master of English prose. And that was what caused me to fall in love with the writings of C.S. Lewis, only within the last decade or so. Of course, this year is the 80th anniversary of Lewis delivering the lectures that would become, some years later, the little book, The Abolition of Man. One of the things that I enjoy doing as an academic is reading books that were written a long time ago that have proved to be more prophetic than the author could possibly have known at the time. Some of you I know have read my Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. By the way, it's interesting, I was introduced last year, I think, at an EPPC event where somebody said, Trueman wrote the book that everybody's talking about. And when I started, I said, actually, I wrote the book that nobody's talking about, Oxford Handbook to Calvin and Calvinism. That was my last book. I'm just the Reformation guy who happened to get lucky a couple of times in the topic that he chose. But in the Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, I deal with the work of Philip Reeve. In 1966, Philip Reeve wrote a work, The Triumph of the Therapeutic, that if you read it today, could have been written yesterday. The man could not possibly have known in 1966 that he would so precisely analyse the condition of society in America in 2023. On the darker side, I also deal in that book with The Sexual Revolution by Wilhelm Reich, written in 1936. But again, if you read it today, you would think he was writing about America in this day and this age. And I would put into that category C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, particularly the final essay, the final lecture that was entitled The Abolition of Man. I think that essay, in the way he looks at the role that technology has played in how it transforms how we think of what it means to be a human being, Lewis could not possibly have known in 1943 how accurate his analysis and predictions would be. And that leads me then to the topic of tonight's talk, and it's going to be relatively short. I was lecturing in Notre Dame on Monday, and my friend Philip Munoz said to me, keep it to 40 minutes, and I said, good luck with that. I'm a Protestant preacher. None of you are Catholic 10-minute homilies. You're going to get the full works. Well, I am going to restrict myself tonight to about 15 minutes. I think there are 2 ways in which the abolition of man is prophetic today. The first is this. I think ours is an era where anthropology, what it means to be a human being, is the question. I spent much of my career teaching church history. It's somewhat simplistic sort of taxonomy that I'm going to give you at this point, but one might say that the big issue of the 2nd through the 5th century was the doctrine of God and Christology. They were the big issues. One might move forward to the Reformation and say there, questions of authority, questions of sacraments, questions of salvation are the big issues in the 16th, 17th century. Today, I think the big issue is, what does it mean to be a human being? That's the pressing question that I think Christians need to address today. That, I think, is where Lewis is prescient. He pinpoints that question in 1943. Second area of dramatic prescience is technology. I think one of the things we need to understand in this day and age is it is not arguments that are driving the way society is changing, it is other things. Supreme among them is technology. I was teaching this morning on Alistair McIntyre. It's a very fleeting visit. I taught this morning in Grove. I'm teaching tomorrow morning in Grove. I have delayed my class till 11:20 to give me a bit of, baggage retrieval margin of error at Pittsburgh Airport. But this morning I was teaching in Grove on Alistair McIntyre, and I made the point, McIntyre, again, a very prophetic book, 1981, After Virtue, predicts the rise of the expert, the technocrat, the technologist. That's the era in which we live today. The masters of technology are the driving gurus of our day. My wife and I were watching the news this morning, and I'd never even heard of this thing, but somebody said, the news report was the chief executive of Reddit is coming up with some idea to solve the climate crisis. And my comment to my wife was, I don't even know what Reddit is, but I wish the chief executive of Reddit would focus on doing like Reddit things and leave the world to the people that have been democratically elected to handle those kind of problems. But that announcement is emblematic of the world in which we live. The guys with the hands on the levers of power of technology are really the guys who shape the way we think about the world today. It is the Promethean temptation, is it not? You remember the legend of Prometheus, the Titan, who gave humanity fire and allowed them to be like gods. That, I think, is our temptation today. Technology is our fire. Technology tempts us towards transcendence. Technology tempts us to see our human limitations as problems, not as the things that actually define us. That, I think, is highly problematic. When the human condition, if you like, becomes a problem, rather than the thing that makes us who we are, a real problem is emerging. That, of course, is enabled. That imagination is fired by technology. Where do we see this? I can't deal with any of these in any depth, but I would say we see this in numerous ways in society today. Medical ethics. Medical ethics has moved, I think, over the last 50 years from being rooted in an idea of restoration, having a normative understanding of what it means to be a human being, such that when one falls short of that, it can be restored. You're badly burned in a fire, plastic surgery is used to restore some basic human dignity to you, to a point where medical ethics are now to do with transcendence. Most of the money, I would guess, in this country spent on plastic surgery is not restorative plastic surgery, it is transcendent plastic surgery. Think of the current cultural thinking on sex and sexuality. Think of reproductive technologies, whether we're thinking of contraception on the one hand or IVF on the other. What those technologies do, particularly I think contraceptive technology, is tilts us towards thinking that sex is recreation, not procreation. Abigail Favale, the Notre Dame professor, has written very eloquently and in a very learned way on gender theory from a Christian perspective, makes the point that the fertility switch in human beings, we've always been able to switch it on and off. But the default setting now is off. And that reshapes how we think about sex. And because I think sex is a very important part of what it means to be a human being, that's why sexual assault is considered far more serious at law than other forms of assault. Because sex connects to who we are at a very deep level, changing attitudes to sex really reflect a deep transformation of anthropology. Think of pornography. Actually, don't think of pornography, but think of the concept of pornography. What does that do? I was reading Louise Penny's new book, Case Against the Sexual Revolution. She's not a Christian, she's a feminist. But boy, does she understand that pornography is bad news for women. Very much so. And the statistics and the anecdotes she gives there about how so many young men today have their vision of what it means to be a sexual being, have the vision of what it means to have a female partner shaped by what they see on pornography, on pornographic websites. That's very disturbing. And it's technological at its deepest level. When I was a young man, one could not engage in pornography because there was always the risk. I lived next door to the vicar. There was always the risk that the vicar's wife would see you buying that magazine or going to that place. And social shame. My generation were no more moral than this generation. But social shame was a powerful force for controlling young male behavior in a way that doesn't apply anymore. And as we change our view of sex, we change our view of what other people are, we change our view of who we ourselves are at that point. Think of the disembodiments of human life. When most human encounters now seem to be mediated via screens or shaped by algorithms, what does that mean for what it means to be a human being? I said this to the students at Grove on numerous occasions. When I was at school, I had half a dozen friends. They were real physical presences in my life. It meant that when we fell out, we knew we'd fallen out. When they took a pop at me in some way, I knew about it because they were there. We had a very easy way of resolving it. It was called fighting. And we generally didn't get sent to camp. I was in an all-boys school. I always said to students, it was like an arena of casual male violence for 7 years between the age of 11 and 18. We got into fights, problem solved. Nobody went to counselling. Nobody went to counselling. There was just this natural regulation of human relationships because engagement was embodied. I've not been involved in many face-to-face debates in my time. But what's interested me about the face-to-face debates I've been involved in is the temperature in them has generally gone down. Because it's a real embodied person engaging with a real embodied person. There are all kinds of subliminal tells that pass between human beings when they're face-to-face with each other. There are jokes you can exchange between competing speeches. A world where there is disembodied engagement, Twitter, for example, is typically a world where the temperature seems to go up, and rather rapidly. That affects how we think about what it means to be human, and how we engage as human beings. There are other things we could talk about. Notion of authority in a disembodied world. Spent a lot of time over the last 2 years giving talks around the country. I'm always amused when people on YouTube take a pop at me being a coward. They're very welcome to join me in the public lectures I give on LGBTQ stuff around the country. Leave their YouTube videos and come and join me. It would be fun to have them with me at some point. But some of the questions I get asked there, some of the most painful questions are from parents. How do we protect our kids from this stuff? My answer is always, don't give them a smartphone. If you give your kids a smartphone, then the most powerful authority in your child's life is some of the most evil people out there who get direct access to your kid. I don't care how carefully you homeschool your kid. If you give them a smartphone, you might as well not educate them at all. Disembodied engagement has transformed the structures of authority and power. Life has become one of performance. Transhumanism. Transhumanism is in many ways the latest iteration of the abolition of man. I wouldn't say it's an error. I don't think it constitutes an error in my book, but it certainly constitutes a lacuna or a hole. In the big book where I deal with transgenderism, I deal with it very much as part of the LGBTQ sort of cultural political push. And I think it is part of that. But I think more significantly, from a philosophical perspective, transgenderism is actually a subset of transhumanism. It's transhumanist technology. And it's interesting, actually, if you go back to the early, it's the early transhumanism, but transhumanism, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, some of the early transhumanist pioneers are transgender. And that's not incidental. Because what does transgenderism share in common with transhumanism? The body is raw material. Or, in a more radical form, the body's a problem. Whatever else it is, the body isn't who the person is. The body may be, in fact, a problem that the real person has to overcome in order to become that real person. All of these things, medical ethics, attitudes to sex, disembodiment of human life, authority, transhumanism, are functions of the social imaginary. It's a rather awkward term, but essentially means the way people intuit the world. They're all functions of a social imaginary that is only possible and is profoundly shaped by technology. You could not have this world that we have now on any of those fronts without dramatic technological developments. And that is the challenge, I think, that faces all of us in this room. It's the challenge that faces the Davenant Institute. It's the challenge that faces anyone who claims to be a Christian and also to want to make an impact in the public sphere at this particular point in time. The challenge is this: we cannot escape technology, but somehow we have to address the fact that so much of technology is abolishing what it means to be a human being. Our lives are not simply involved with technology, they are in many ways realized or actualized by it. It's one of the things that it's very pretentious to begin a sentence with, "This is what I learned from Martin Heidegger." Very pretentious. Unfortunately, I have to use that phrase at this point. The one thing I learned from reading Martin, the one thing I understood when I read Martin Heidegger was that technology is not simply an instrument that individuals use. It's actually part of their very selves. Technology does not allow us to address reality in certain ways. It kind of mediates or constitutes that reality for us. So what do we need? What do we need in this time? What does Davenant Institute need to be looking for? I say, we need Christian thinkers who are addressing this challenge. There are a lot of distractions out there at the moment in a highly polarized political environment. But what we really need is not Christians taking pot shots at other Christians. What we need is serious Christian thinkers addressing the big question of what does it mean to be human in a highly technologized society. I had the privilege yesterday of interviewing, he's actually a former student of mine. It's always great when you interview a former student that you think is, wow, this guy's gone on to be far cleverer and far more knowledgeable than I am. Grace Satanta teaches at RTS, at its DC campus. He was a member of my church in Philadelphia. He was a student of mine at Westminster Theological Seminary, and he's one of those wonderful students who's gone on to be great. Many of them go on to embarrass me, and I don't want to talk about those. Grace Satanta has gone on to be one that does not embarrass me. And Gray was talking about, we was interviewing about neo-Calvinism of the 19th century, and he made the point, what the neo-Calvinists, Barwin, Kuyper, etc. in the 19th century did, was they drew upon the classic Catholic and Calvinist Christian tradition in order to address the specific issues of their day. The nation state, pluralism and religious freedom, the impact of industrialism. We need Christian thinkers who do the same today. Not those who reinvent the gospel or the Christian faith, but those who will draw upon that faith to help our children and our children's children think in clear Christian terms about the specific challenges we face today. And I would suggest that many of the challenges we see out there, the LGBTQ challenge, for example, these are symptomatic of a deeper challenge. What does it mean to be a human being made in God's image, living in the technological society in which we now do? And I would suggest that the answer to that cannot remain at the level of an argument. One of the things that Lewis teaches us, I think, is that the battle for the soul is the battle for the imagination. How do we win the battle for the imagination? Oliver O'Donovan comments that he was struck in the 1970s and 80s that what he regarded as the weakest argument for abortion proved to be the strongest in the court of public opinion. Weakest argument being the baby is merely, the womb is merely part of the woman's body. And O'Donovan comes to the conclusion that that argument proved so strong, I'm paraphrasing him here, proved to be so strong because it resonated with the cultural imagination of human beings as free and autonomous. The battle we face is not one of winning the argument. I actually think we have the best arguments, but we will lose with the best arguments if we neglect the imagination. Gripping the imagination is key. For that, we need strong ecclesial communities. We don't need to just argue about what it means to be a human being in a technological society. We need to demonstrate that in our communal lives. We need to reflect and act upon those things that make us truly human. And those things that make us truly human are not arguments. I'm thinking of things like friendship, kindness, altruism, forgiveness, gratitude. Catholicism has a rich literature reflecting upon these things. I think we need the same in Protestantism. And that brings me back to where I began. I'm grateful for the honour that you've given me this evening. I'm grateful for wonderful colleagues and for friends, for a blessed life and a gracious God. Let us all remember the things that make us truly human as a way of rebelling against the abolition of man. Thank you very much.